Most people view the Roman gladiator through a cinematic lens. Perfectly chiseled warriors, heroic deaths in the dust. However, modern entertainment gets roughly 90% of the story completely wrong. The actual Colosseum was significantly weirder, far grosser, and arguably more shocking than any blockbuster could portray. We're diving into a world where warriors intentionally cultivated bellies, emperors cheated like toddlers, and fans literally poured wine into the graves of their fallen idols. These are 10 insane historical realities that were left on the cutting room floor. Some are hilarious, others are profoundly uncomfortable. All of them are the brutal truth of Rome. Number 1. The chubby champions, biological armor. Forget the washboard abs of the movie posters. Real gladiators were actually barley munchers who stayed chubby on purpose. These fighters survived on mountains of legumes and grains specifically to build a thick, protective layer of belly fat. Why? Because that squishy padding served as a biological shield. A shallow slash from a sharp blade would slice through the fat without reaching vital organs. It was ancient body armor grown from within. The lanistas, the ruthless trainers who owned these schools, calculated this down to a science. A cut that sprays blood looks spectacular to the screaming crowd, but if the fighter survives, he lives to generate profit next week. In the arena, everyone won except the man with the six-pack who bled out instantly. The most successful fighters looked more like heavyweight wrestlers than fitness models. They were known as hordiari, a nickname that Hollywood conveniently ignores in favor of oiled-up muscles. Number 2. The blind fighters, ancient reality TV. Perhaps the most absurd class of fighter ever conceived was the andabata. These men were forced into the arena wearing helmets with absolutely no eye holes. They lived in complete darkness. They would stumble blindly through the sand, swinging massive swords at thin air, bumping into each other, and occasionally striking an opponent by pure accident. To the Roman crowd, this was premium comedy. Imagine paying top dollar to watch two blindfolded men attempt to murder one another while tripping over their own feet. It was the Roman equivalent of a twisted reality show 2,000 years before cameras. Some historians believe these were condemned criminals with no other options, while others suggest they fought by listening for their opponent's breath. Either way, it highlights a culture that viewed humiliation as a form of high art. Number 3. The thumb myth, flipping the signal. Every movie features that dramatic moment where the emperor decides a loser's fate with a thumb. But modern scholars believe that a thumbs down actually meant to lower the weapons and spare the loser. The signal for death was likely a thumb pointed upward toward the throat, or a thumb thrust sideways, mimicking a stabbing motion. The Latin phrase pollice verso simply means turned thumb, without specifying the direction. It is likely that any extended thumb meant kill him, while a thumb tucked away inside a closed fist meant mercy. For 2 millennia, we have been using the exact wrong gesture. Every time a film shows an emperor slowly turning his thumb down for dramatic effect, Roman ghosts are likely screaming at the screen. Number 4. The cheating emperor, Commodus the coward. Emperor Commodus genuinely believed he was the reincarnation of Hercules. He would enter the arena himself, which sounds brave until you look at the fine print. His opponents were usually prisoners, wounded soldiers, or even amputees. His sword was razor-sharp steel. Theirs were made of wood. He would slaughter animals that were already chained or drugged just to look impressive. After every victory, he would charge the Roman treasury 1,000,000 sesterces. He wasn't just a cheater, he was billing the taxpayers for his own delusion. He once decapitated an ostrich in the arena and walked to the Senate section holding the severed head, silently threatening the politicians. Nobody laughed. They just sat there terrified while the leader of the world played pretend with a dead bird. It's no wonder the Senate eventually arranged to have him strangled in his bath. Number 5. Stadium hygiene, the sewer in the stands. The Colosseum held 50,000 screaming fans, but the sanitation situation was an absolute catastrophe. While there were public latrines, they were nowhere near sufficient for a crowd that size. Most spectators refused to leave their seats during the action because someone would immediately steal their spot. The result? People simply went where they sat. Ceramic jars were passed around for the lucky ones, but everyone else used the stairs, the aisles, or the floor beneath them. The hierarchy of the arena meant the cheap seats at the very top, where women and the poor sat, were essentially open sewers by the mid-afternoon. Wealthy Romans in the lower sections remained relatively dry, but the people upstairs were literally soaking in the collective fluids of the city. Modern stadium bathrooms are a luxury compared to the reek of the Roman games.
Number 6. Gladiator groupies. Ancient sponsorship deals. Successful gladiators were the world's first celebrity athletes, complete with massive sponsorship deals. Their faces were plastered onto oil lamps, pottery, and glassware. Fans bought these items believing that some of the fighters' strength might transfer to them through the objects. It is exactly like modern stars selling sneakers, only 2,000 years earlier. Graffiti on the walls of Pompeii reveals the depth of this fandom, with inscriptions praising fighters for their physical prowess and appeal to women. One famous piece of graffiti essentially translates to, "Salatus the Thracian makes the girls swoon." Marketing has not changed in 2 millennia. Humans have always been willing to buy random garbage as long as a famous person's face is on the container. Number 7. Theatrical executions, mythological snuff. Roman justice was a theatrical production. Condemned criminals weren't just executed, they were forced to perform their deaths in elaborate mythological cosplay. A man sentenced for arson might be dressed as Hercules and then actually burned alive on stage to satisfy the crowd's thirst for educational entertainment. Others were cast as Icarus, fitted with wax wings and dropped from fatal heights, or Orpheus, surrounded by animals that were, unlike the myth, starving and aggressive. The Romans viewed this as the ultimate justice. Your death becomes a moral lesson for the masses. They essentially invented the concept of the snuff film and labeled it as culture. Number 8. The ash supplement, ancient sports science. We know that gladiators drank a beverage made from wood ash dissolved in water. While it sounds disgusting, modern analysis of gladiator bones shows remarkably high calcium levels. This ash drink was essentially an ancient sports supplement. The calcium strengthened their skeletons to better absorb the high-impact trauma of the arena. These fighters were performing sports nutrition through trial and error long before protein shakes existed. Someone noticed that the fighters who drank the gray sludge broke fewer bones, so it became the standard training fuel. It was Roman science, repulsive, gritty, and undeniably effective at keeping their investments in the game. Number 9. The wealthy property, slaves with slaves. There is a bizarre Roman paradox that would baffle any modern lawyer. Gladiators were legally classified as infames, meaning they were technically property without rights. Yet top-tier fighters earned massive prize money and gifts. This led to a situation where a human being who was legally someone else's property could actually accumulate enough wealth to purchase their own house, land, and even their own slaves. Roman law managed to accommodate this contradiction without breaking. The gladiator still belonged to his master, but his assets belonged to him. If he died, his property went to his heirs. It is a staggering example of how deeply slavery was woven into the Roman DNA. Even the slaves participated in the ownership of others. Number 10. The wooden sword, the price of freedom. The rudis was a simple wooden training sword, but to a gladiator it was the most valuable object in the world.
It symbolized official retirement and the return of one's freedom. When a fighter earned his rudis, he was no longer obligated to bleed for the crowd. Some took the gift and opened businesses. Others became trainers for the next iteration. However, some legends, like the fighter Flamma, famously refused the wooden sword multiple times. He was offered freedom 4 separate times and turned it down every time to keep fighting. Inside the arena, he was a god. Outside, he was just another penniless ex-slave. For some, the wooden stick meant everything. For others, the glory of the sand was the only life worth living. The real Colosseum was dirtier, stranger, and far more complex than any Hollywood epic will ever show you. These 10 facts prove that the Roman world wasn't just about violence, it was about economics, celebrity, and a desperate need for distraction. We are all technically living in a world built on the foundations they laid, for better or worse. If you had to choose between being a blind Andabata or an emperor's Hercules opponent, which would you pick? Let's start the debate in the comments. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep uncovering the gritty truth of history. See you in the next arena.